We have heard a lot about homelessness in Saskatchewan. Just yesterday, the government of Saskatchewan announced they are earmarking an additional $20 million over 3 years to improve services for people without homes. Some of that money will be used to create up to 40 new emergency shelter spaces and 60 new supportive housing spaces. But how do we prevent more people from becoming homeless in the first place? Today we're hearing about people in our province who are living paycheck to paycheck, one accident or unexpected expense away from not being able to pay their rent. We're talking about people on disability or government assistance who are trying to do the impossible math of trying to pay all their bills with a check that just doesn't go far enough. Today on the show, we'll speak to people who have ideas on how we can bring more folks out of poverty in Saskatchewan and across the country. And we'll also hear about guaranteed basic income pilots that have taken place across the country and what we've learned from them. And of course, we love to hear from you. What would make the most meaningful difference in the lives of people experiencing poverty? If you have firsthand experience, what are the biggest challenges for you? You can call 1-800-716-2221 or email bluesky@cbc.ca. Our guests today all have watched the fallout of the affordability crisis in Canada. They've seen people who are living paycheck to paycheck being asked to do more with less. And they have ideas for what could make life better for people who are currently living below the poverty line. Joining us now in our Regina studio is Peter Gilmer. He's with the Regina Anti-Poverty Ministry. For more than 30 years, Peter has worked with people as they try and navigate some very difficult situations. He knows what works and what does not work. So Peter, welcome to Blue Sky and thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Tracy Smith-Carrier is a professor and Canada Research Chair in advancing the UN Sustainable Development Goals. She's in the School of Humanitarian Studies at Royal Roads University. And she recently wrote a piece for The Conversation looking at how Canada is doing at meeting the country's food security needs. Welcome to the show, Tracy.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here.
And we also have Elaine Power. She's a professor of socio-cultural studies of sport, health, and the body at Queen's University. She has looked at how food banks are used in this country, and she has studied the results of guaranteed basic income pilot projects. Elaine, welcome to Blue Sky.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's so great to have the three of you here. And I want to start with you, Peter. You've been doing anti-poverty work and helping people navigate complicated systems for decades. How do you think things have changed? Or have they?
Well, I think they have gotten worse over the years in many ways. One of the examples that we use is most of the people that we work with are on provincial income security programs. And as it stands now, a person on the Saskatchewan Income Support Program only receives $660 in Regina and Saskatoon for all their shelter-related needs. So that's rent as well as utilities, unlike previous programs that actually covered the actual cost of utilities. People have to pay their power, energy, water, phone, as well as their rent out of that amount. And it's actually even less in outside of the two major cities at just $600 a month. And then there's $365 in an adult basic income, which is for everything else, all food needs. And so basically for just a little over $1,000, people have to cover all of their basic needs. For people who are on the Saskatchewan Assured Income for Disability with significant and enduring disabilities, they're having to meet their needs in Regina and Saskatoon again on $1,159 a month, but at least they get utilities as a top-up, but it's very little. And I should mention with the SAID program, as it's known, it had actually gone 8 years from 2015 to 2023 without an increase whatsoever. There was no indexing during that process. We've had a couple of small increases in recent provincial budgets, but they didn't even meet the present increases in cost of living, let alone making up for the 8 years where there was no increase whatsoever. So people in those programs are living not just in poverty, but in extremely deep poverty. And of course, when you add that with the rising cost of rent and food, we've had the highest rent increases in the country. We've had a loss of non-market-based housing, so lack of social housing being used. So, yeah, it's a very difficult situation for the people we're working with.
Peter, with this rent increase you just touched on, and I wrote down this number, the $660 you mentioned earlier for people in Regina who for rent and utilities. Like, I'm curious what people are telling you, what you are seeing. How is it even possible to find any rental home with that amount of money?
Well, it really is impossible to be able to cover your rent out of that shelter allowance. So what it really means is that people are taking money out of their food budgets and other budgets to meet their other basic needs to be able to keep a roof over their heads. So we know that while there's been a huge growth in the unhoused population, for every one person that's presently unhoused, there's so many that are on the cusp and are not meeting food security and other basic needs because of the cost of their rent.
So with people who are living, from check to check and trying to do the math here, how worried are they that they are becoming homeless as we're seeing the unhoused population grow? Like, what's the worrying like for people?
Yeah, we've seen a huge increase in the stress levels for individuals and households. People are really nervous that they will end up on the street and are making all kinds of very difficult decisions to make sure that doesn't happen. But as we know, that there's been a huge growth in the numbers of people who have become homeless over the course of the last 5 years.
Peter, I just want to remind listeners that we would love to hear from them as well. Maybe some of them are living the exact experience you were describing, just trying to find the money to pay rent, to pay the bills, to pay for food. What would make the most meaningful difference in your lives? And what are the biggest challenges for you? You can call us at 1-800-716-2221 or email bluesky@cbc.ca. Peter, you mentioned some things that you say make it hard. You mentioned the SAID program. You mentioned the cost of food, the rent increases. What else do you attribute these challenges, the growing of the challenges to?
Well, to be honest with you, I think that we have really dropped the ball in terms of making sure that there are social and economic protections for people. And, in terms of the big picture, we've always said that we really need to be putting legislation in place that protects people so that they actually do have an adequate income, that they do have a living wage, because it's also the many working poor families that are having a difficult time keeping a roof over their heads. So at a time when we've been competing for the lowest minimum wage in the country. So we think that there needs to be legislation that turns the minimum wage into an actual living wage, along with adequate income security benefits, but also guaranteeing that we do have adequate, quality, and affordable housing and childcare for people. These are all rights that we've committed to under international law, under the UN Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, but we really have no domestic protections there. And so as there's been, significantly growing economic inequality in our society, people have had less and less to meet those basic needs.
And I know we will be talking more with Tracy and Elaine. I know there's a lot of head nodding going along there. We'll come to you in just a moment. Before we talk more about those policies and policy changes, Peter, I wanna we dropped some words like SAID, just helping people remember what we're talking about. Can you tell us or remind us what benefits currently exist in our province, Peter?
Well, there's really just the two primary provincial income security programs. The Saskatchewan Assured Income for Disability, or SAID, which is for people who have been through the disability assessment process and have significant and enduring disabilities. And while it does provide a little bit more, it still falls into deep poverty for the people that are on it. The even less adequate program is the Saskatchewan Income Support Program, which provides less benefits, very few special needs. When it replaced the old Saskatchewan Assistance Plan, it got rid of many special needs that were on that program, but particularly the most important change with that was the loss of actual cost of utilities. At least people on SAID and traditionally on the social assistance had those base utilities covered, but now they're having to cover all out of that shelter benefit.
So that was, just reminding people, that was the $660 shelter benefit, right?
Yeah, for Regina, Saskatoon, $600 in the rest of the province.
Okay. Now, Peter, you talked about wanting to end legislated poverty, and you touched a little bit on this earlier. What do you exactly mean by that, though, legislated poverty?
Well, what we often say is that when governments set income security, disability supports, and minimum wage is too low, what they're doing in effect is legislating poverty. And particularly when they're not controlling the amounts that people are having to pay for basic needs like housing. So we think that in order to end legislated poverty, you have to make sure that you've got adequate income security in place, you need to make sure you've got a living wage in place, and you need to make sure that you've got quality and affordable housing accessible, meaning more social housing where rent is based on income, but also where we are capping the amounts that rent can be raised in any given year, because rent has gone way beyond the capacity of the people that we work with to meet.
So you gave us some examples of changes you would like to see. I'm wondering how hard it is even maybe to, and maybe it's not, I'm not sure if someone needs help, how hard is it to get into the SAID program or into the
SIS program?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Like, how is that even, is that another barrier or even another legislative poverty factor, would you say?
Absolutely. Like, even though I talk a lot about the adequacy piece, because that's something that is pressed on us every day, we actually spend most of our time just getting people through the hoops so that they're qualified, going through the eligibility process to get on to SAID, but even on to SIS, that there's many hoops that people have to jump through and a lot of verification that they have to do in order to get onto the programs. We often say that being on income assistance is a full-time job because it takes so much time and effort to be able to just get that pittance of income.
And then what is an example that people have to show to even qualify for those programs?
Well, because they're means tested and are deemed to be benefits of last resort, there's all kinds of information to show that you don't have any other income or supports in place. If you're on the SIS program, or many people on the SIS program have to show that they've done everything possible to gain and maintain employment. So we're dealing with denials and cutoffs of people onto these programs every day.
Peter, again, I just want to remind people, if they are having any experiences, we'd love to hear your story. Please call us if you have ideas on how what would make a difference in the lives of people experiencing poverty. Please call us 1-800-716-2221 or email bluesky@cbc.ca. Peter, you mentioned one of the changes you would like to see is more social housing. And I understand in the past that you talked about vacant Sask housing. I'm curious if you know where things are at now with that. Are there any empty units just sitting there?
There absolutely is, and this has been a big issue. Over a few years, we've had over $500 million of Sask housing property that's been vacant. And as I understand it, presently we're looking at 2,100 vacant units province-wide and 440 in the city of Regina alone. So these are very high levels. When we're looking at a situation of so many people being unhoused and the crisis in terms of affordability, having all those units where rent is based on income sitting vacant is obviously a problem, and that's part of the crisis.
Why do they continue to sit empty?
It's a very good question. Obviously the upkeep or the work and resources going into having them ready for folks is part of the issue. But yeah, there's a lot of questions to be asked as to why is it that we've allowed so many units to remain vacant in the midst of a housing crisis.
I understand we have someone calling us, Stuart in Saskatchewan. Stuart, welcome to Blue Sky, and thanks so much for calling us. What are your thoughts, Stuart?
Hi there. Yeah, we're going to spend $1 million in Saskatoon for homeless for 60 people. If you just increase social welfare to those people that you're going to try to help, $1,000 a month more, let's say, that's going to service 100 people a year to maybe 150 people a year. Wouldn't it be a lot better spending it on direct housing instead of indirect housing?
I appreciate your thoughts, Stuart. Peter, what's your response to that?
Well, I absolutely agree. I do think that while at the moment, because we are in a state of emergency and a crisis in regard to homelessness, I do think that there are some immediate supports that have to be in place, and we do need more supportive housing. That being said, we need to deal with the real structural issues head on, and that does mean putting more money into creation and expansion of social housing. And it also means making sure that people have the resources to pay for their most basic needs. One number that we throw around a lot is that we had a study done by a social policy researcher a few years ago that said that in order to raise everybody in Saskatchewan out of poverty would cost roughly $547 million, which sounds like a lot of money, but we're paying $3.8 billion a year in terms of the cost of poverty in our health, justice, and family support systems. So the reality is we're spending 7 times as much on the cost of poverty than what it would cost to end poverty altogether.
Peter, it's interesting as we talk about homelessness. Just yesterday, the province announced more money, $20 million for the provincial approach to homelessness, or PATH. Now, this funding program was established 2 years ago with $40.3 million. Regina's mayor says $1.1 million will be used to address immediate needs for shelter in Regina. I think that's what what Stuart was talking about, and that you also touched on. What are your thoughts on the province's announcements, but also what the Regina mayor says that they want to spend some of the money on?
Well, I mean, I do think that we need to make sure that we're putting money in, as I said, into supportive housing, because I think that the approach of making sure that there's wraparound supports for people with the most complex challenges is really important. But I do fall back on the concern that what we really need is housing. We've got a vacancy rate right now of it's been at 1.4% in Regina across the board, but just we also have such a low percentage of housing which is non-market based. So I really do think that the best use of resources is making sure that there's the affordable housing in place and that people have the incomes to afford that.
I want to bring in another caller. Stephanie is reaching us from Saskatoon. Hi, Stephanie, and thanks for calling Blue Sky. What's on your mind today?
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to speak to the disability supports in the province. So my fiance has been on disability for about 3 years now, and the process for getting on disability is just such a nightmare, whether you're looking at provincial or federal assistance. And the provincial program, unfortunately, a lot of the requirements are income-based, and they also look at spousal income, which is a huge barrier for a lot of people that I've noticed, because since I make a certain amount of money, he cannot get onto Saskatchewan income assistance whatsoever, even though my income is not very great. Because of that, it automatically rules us out. So I'm just wondering kind of if the guests can speak to why the income requirements are so restrictive, and why spousal income is even taken into account when, especially if the spouse doesn't make very much money to begin with.
Stephanie, I really appreciate you sharing your story with us. Thank you. And Peter, of course, what's your answer to Stephanie's question?
Well, Stephanie's identified a problem that we see every day, which is that just about any other form of household or other income that people can access, they're expected to access. So when, and the threshold is so low that it makes it very difficult to be able to get even a small top up from the SED program or certainly from the SIS program. So I do think that part of the issue is exempting more of the forms of income that could potentially go against SED and SIS. There was a little bit of progress in terms of earned income or wage exemptions over the course of the last couple of years, but even that needs to grow significantly. And there's just very few things that are deemed exempted from provincial income security programs. The child benefit and GST and some other federal rebates are waived, but most income that people have access to goes against their potential to be on the programs, and that whole exemption question is something that we do deal with every day.
And I want to, David Shield is here, and I want to go to him in a second. Just, Peter, my last question on this. I mean, obviously, financially, it's super challenging, but how does it make people feel if you're like, sorry, you don't qualify, your spouse makes too much, please depend on them?
Yeah, well, we know that the stress levels and the intensification or exacerbation of mental health crises really grow with the level of economic and income insecurity that we have. Unfortunately, too often what we have is a program of income insecurity as opposed to providing a real floor for people and protection for people.
I bring in our two other guests who have been listening patiently. I would like to remind you, if you would like to join the conversation today, maybe you are experiencing homelessness or are experiencing poverty, maybe you are struggling to pay your bills. We really appreciate you calling us and sharing your experiences. Maybe you want to send an email. And what would make the most differences in your life? What would help you? You can call us at 1-800-716-2221 or email bluesky@cbc.ca. Now, I would love to bring in our other guests who've been very patient, and they can share more of a national perspective to the conversation, and especially when it comes to food security. Elaine and Tracy, I want to, first of all, though I know you've been nodding along the way, I want to give you a chance to share some of your initial thoughts on what we've been talking about. Elaine, starting with you.
Well, you said thank you so much, Teresa, and really appreciated hearing Peter. And although you said I was waiting patiently, part of me feels like I just want to self-combust in anger because it's really infuriating, the kinds of situations that so many low-income folks are facing right now. And it sounds exactly like Ontario, where I am right now. It's very much the same. And we know right across the country that income assistance programs are well below the deep. People are in deep poverty. It's impossible to live. And in fact, an Anglican priest in Toronto who's just written a book about encampments, she says what we're telling people who are on income assistance is that they don't deserve to live because the levels are so inadequate.
Tracy, what are your thoughts?
I'm in agreement with everything that's been said. Lots of anger on my side as well. It's just not sustainable to expect that the charitable model is going to provide for people's food needs. That's often the go-to when we talk about poverty. I mean, they're very much linked. Food insecurity is directly tied to income insecurity. But the food banks across the country are beyond capacity. We've seen an increase. Food Banks Canada has noted a 99.37, almost 100% increase from 2019 to 2024. a 42% increase in Saskatchewan. It's not sustainable. And the reality of it is those programs do not actually meet people's food needs. People don't get out of poverty by using charitable programs. And there's a loss of dignity for people who do use them. So, sorry, go ahead.
No, so yeah, it sounds like, Tracy, food charity is for you. It's not the answer to fix the problem. Now, Elaine, you also looked at food bank usage. What stood out for you there?
Well,
Elaine,
one of the things we know is that only about 20% of households that are food insecure ever go to the food bank. So that 1 in 5. So, and the numbers are fairly consistent. Food Banks Canada noted, almost 100% increase from 2019 to 2024. We've seen the same doubling of food insecure households, but it's gone from 5.6 million to 10 million over that time period. So now we have 1 in 4 households in Canada living in with food insecurity, and 1 in 3 children living in these households that are very poor and under huge amounts of stress. And we know that that kind of stress and poverty in childhood is a developmental marker that people carry with them for the rest of their lives and can impact their health throughout their adult lifetime. It's almost incomprehensible in a country this wealthy that 1 in 3 children would be living in food insecure households. So food banks are kind of the visible tip of the iceberg, but they're not serving most people who are food insecure. And as Tracy said, they don't take people out of food insecurity. And I believe they've actually become a hindrance. Like they've become a smokescreen that hides the reality of poverty and creates this sense that, oh, well, somebody's looking after it, so we don't need to, in public health terms, we talk about going upstream and seeing what's really going on here. So I mean, food banks are doing the best that they can, but I think they're a hindrance to actually solving this problem.
So if you call them a hindrance and kind of hiding the reality of the problem, then what were they actually designed for initially?
They were designed as an emergency response in the 1980s. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when we didn't have food banks. The first one was founded in 1981 in Edmonton, and throughout the 80s, they really proliferated. And the initial founders thought it was just, it would just be for a few years until the economy picked up again, and then they would all fold up and go away. And I think they've become far too convenient in multiple ways. To fold up and go away, and the founding corresponded very much with a new kind of political era that we call neoliberalism, where government supports have really come under attack. That philosophy has grown and spread at the same time as food banks. So I don't think that's a coincidence.
I want to go to some of our callers. And I think housing is part of some of their questions. Nick, we start with you. You're calling from Swift Current. Thanks for calling Blue Sky. And what would you like to share with us today?
Good afternoon. I have a couple of things. The first is that we currently have 450 housing units, public housing units, that are not available and really need repair. These housing units, there used to be 1,800, so I'm not sure. There must have been something that happened. I imagine the government sold them off, and 1,300 units were sold off or whatever, removed from the list. These units have been under repair, and I underline my next word, 6 years they have been under repair. Minister Makowski had those on his list, and he was getting hounded by the opposition. He never repaired anything, nothing. So that's really one of the issues I'd like to bring forward. The other one is that the rent that is paid from social services to a landlord. When I was a landlord about 15 years ago, the government actually paid me for the rent that the client was getting, or the housing that the client was accessing. And now it's going to the client, and what they do is they spend the money and they don't have any housing. So I'll leave your guests to address those issues.
Maybe I bring...
Thank you. I'll listen for your answer. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Nick. Peter, maybe I bring you in because we talked a little bit about housing units, and so maybe you can talk on that, but especially that second part of the question as well.
Well, one thing I want to start with is that the people that I work with on social assistance, for the most part, are the best budgeters that I know of. They can budget far better than I can. That being said, one of the changes that occurred when the Saskatchewan Income Support Program took over from the Saskatchewan Assistance Plan is that the option of direct payment to landlords was largely done away with. And even though a majority of people on social assistance actually did pay their own bills, I think it was as high as 70%, within the 30% that didn't, where there were addictions and mental health issues at play that could have negative consequences. I think that certainly was a big problem when CIS came into effect. And I do think that we need to make sure that option of direct payment is in place. But in and of itself, it's not really a solution, because the bottom line is, yes, all your money can go to your landlord and you have no money left in terms of the direct payment system. But at the end of the day, you need more money you have to have enough to meet your basic needs. So the direct payment issue is definitely an issue, and it has had serious consequences being without it. But the much bigger issue is the adequacy piece and the fact that people don't have enough to meet all of their most basic needs.
I want to bring in one more caller, and then this kind of helps us talk about how we can meet those basic needs. How people can meet them? And I want to first of all give Colleen from Saskatoon a chance to share her thoughts with us. Colleen, thank you so much for calling Blue Sky today. What's on your mind?
Good morning, everybody. Hello, Saskatchewan. So I wrote a bit here. Sask Party governance has allowed the corporate landlords 24% increase in rents in the last 2 years. We're the highest province across the country for rental increases. If that didn't occur, there'd be people in low-income situations would be able to buy better food and stay healthier. We're almost in pre-Dickens times, like more beans, please. I'm fearful for my own domestic situation, but also for the city of Saskatoon at large, because without hope, people turn to dope if that's their prerogative. All these temporary housing solutions and warming centers angers me, because it's temporary. With semi-permanent housing for the unhoused, it would allow the people to have a more stable lifestyle with all their possessions and medications and everything in one place, allowing them to live in a neighborhood and build community relationships, shopping at the same grocery store and potentially building relationships with neighbors. That could help them.
Thank you, Colleen, for sharing your thoughts. I want to bring in back, or Peter, I don't want to cut you off, so Peter or Elaine or Tracy, but I'm wondering how this, so obviously we talk about the problem of increasing renting costs, but I want to talk about the solutions here, which might be potentially guaranteed basic income. I'm not sure. Elaine, if you want to jump in there.
Sure, thanks. I've been studying food insecurity for over 30 years, and that has led me to become a basic income advocate. So maybe I'm a bit of a, I have a hammer and everything's a nail, but to me, basic income by itself isn't enough. But if we had a guaranteed livable basic income that would enable people to meet their basic needs, it would solve a lot of problems. We could just increase social assistance rates as a start. I mean, we could make social assistance rates, commensurate with the cost of living, but that doesn't solve all the many problems that Peter spoke of in the system, the kind of humiliation, the stigma, all the barriers to getting onto disability. We did have a pilot in Ontario, short-lived. It was prematurely canceled, but we had a basic income pilot that was meant to, as an experiment, to try to figure out a better way to deliver income security to people. And although it was prematurely canceled and the rigorous evaluation plan wasn't executed, the results that we have from that are really quite very positive and quite stunning and remarkable in the ways it improved people's lives.
Why was it cancelled?
We had a change of government.
Okay, that makes sense now. Okay, but you speak very positively about what you saw. So can you tell us a little bit how it worked and how it looked like and what you found?
Well, maybe Tracy. I'll let Tracy jump in because I've been ranting a lot.
So it essentially ensured that everybody had an income up to 75% of the poverty line. What we found was remarkable. It really improved people's mental health and physical health. People were able to increase their healthy food intake. Many were considering going back to school or pursuing new employment opportunities. A lot of them experienced better housing stability. People talking about the fact that they could buy gifts for their children on their birthdays, not relying on generic donated foods or items. They were able to go to the grocery store like everybody else and not have to stand up in the food banks. They could go, they could afford a cup of coffee at Tim Hortons with a friend. So overall, their health and mental health really improved and their stress went down. So it was a remarkable success. And the Ontario Basic Income Pilot is not the only one. We've seen this time and again. It was experimented with in Manitoba in the 1970s, the Minkum study, and our colleague Evelyn Forget has written about that. Many studies in the US, and it's been experimented with around the world, showing it is a very positive policy intervention and can eradicate poverty.
But how are governments, how are societies paying for this?
Well, we pay tax dollars, and as Peter mentioned earlier, it costs a lot more money for us to be dealing with the consequences of these problems than dealing with them head on. So when I think about the federal budget, for example, that was just released, we're planning on spending $82 billion on defense. And I'm not to suggest that we don't need to spend money on defense, but $82 billion. In contrast, it would cost us a net cost of $36 billion to ensure that everybody across the country was out of poverty. So a fraction of the cost to ensure that everybody's livelihoods were improved. We also see this in the housing literature as well. It costs a lot more money to deal with the consequences of homelessness than it would be to ensure that everybody has a house.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think we can think of that as an investment. We can
absolutely an investment.
Yeah, an investment in people, in people's health, but also in the country and the future of the country. So, I mean, people are the most valuable. I mean, I almost hate to put it in this kind of economic term, but people are our most valuable economic resources, and we're squandering the lives of many people right now.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard from some skeptics say, well, this might take away motivation for people to work. What's your response to people who have that kind of thought?
What we see over and over and over and over, whether it's in Canada, the US, in other developed countries or developing countries, is that people take that money and they use it. They invest in their own futures and the futures of their children. So what we see is actually expenses for, this kind of self-medicating, smoking, alcohol, and so on. Those expenses go down, and people actually, because they have this this income floor and a stable income, they're able to use that to actually, well, first of all, the stress goes down so they can actually think about the future and not just what's going to be on the table the next day. So they start planning for the future and they have that kind of stability to be able to do that. And so what we see over and over again is that people use that money really wisely. It's one of the myths and stereotypes that I think prevents us from moving forward, that, people are going to waste it and that they're responsible for their own poverty. I think we have these 19th century Victorian stereotypes of people living in poverty, and our social assistance systems are built on those stereotypes. So it's part of the reason why I think that they're irredeemable.
I'm wondering, Elaine, if that is the reason, because you and Tracy named all those benefits and what you've seen in those pilots. I'm wondering if these stereotypes are the main reason why we don't see more of those pilots or projects or long-term ideas go forward and be implemented, actually, around guaranteed basic income.
I think the stereotypes are a big piece of it. I've actually gotten more cynical over the years. And it was during the pandemic when we had the Canada Emergency Response Benefit that I was watching in Ontario. We were trying to get some paid sick days for people during the pandemic. It seems like a bit of a no-brainer that you'd allow people sick days to, take time off to get their vaccines, et cetera. And I thought, if people had a basic income, they could walk away from these terrible, crappy jobs where they don't have sick benefits and they're forced to go to work where they're not paid, adequately and they're treated poorly. They could walk away from those jobs if we had a guaranteed basic income. And I think that's part of the reason why we don't, because many low-wage employers depend on desperate workers.
I want to just remind people, if you want to share your thoughts, your ideas, we'd love to hear from you. What would make the most meaningful difference in the lives of people experiencing poverty? If you have firsthand experience, what are the biggest challenges for you? You can call us at 1-800-716-2221 or email bluesky@cbc.ca. Peter, you have been listening patiently now, and we've touched on the federal budget. On there was an example around the defense spending. I'm wondering, Peter, what did you see in that budget to help people who are living in poverty, or what did you maybe not see?
It struck me that there was very little on the social side. We're still trying to figure out what the big picture in regard to housing is going to be moving forward, whether or not we're actually going to see an expansion of social housing as part of the mix. When the federal government got out of social housing in 1993, that was a big part of the problem that we've been dealing with all across the country ever since, that without those resources to make sure that we could expand non-market housing, we've seen a real decline in that sector, and I do think that that's been a big consequence. So we're still going to continue to be pushing the feds to be expanding social housing programs and as part of the affordable housing piece.
Before I get to our next caller, I want to give you, Elaine and Tracy, a chance also to jump in. Is there anything you saw in the federal budget that could actually help people who are living in poverty right now?
I didn't see a lot. I don't know about you, Elaine, but no. It was really about a corporate cash giveaway. Really subsidizing very wealthy private actors. That's what it was about. I think, even the removal of the luxury tax on yachts was highly symbolic of the budget.
Yachts and private jets.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I want to go to one more listener. Rhonda is in Regina and she's on the line now. Rhonda, thanks so much for calling Blue Sky. Blue Sky, rather. I'm sorry, Rhonda. What's on your mind right now?
Thank you. Yes, I was mentioning to Nicole that, Blue Sky is a wonderful program, dealing with so many topics, but unfortunately Blue Sky is not the government. So I want to put out a message to all those in Saskatchewan listening who have empathy towards this topic to write to your MLAs. I thought it was so interesting after the last election that Scott Moe, there was kind of an oops, because the NDP gained so much ground in Saskatoon and Regina. And then it seemed like there was a mention of, maybe we need to kind of reconsider some of our policies or so forth. And then I feel like that's kind of slidden and, gone by the wayside as time has gone on. And I've come to the view, which I think many of us have, that, politicians are more interested in votes than they are in, and I'm generalizing here because I know also politicians do get into politics to make change. But nevertheless, votes are, of course, supremely important to them. So if they get lots of letters saying, hey, look, we're dissatisfied with this, then once they realize that the public is thinking a certain way, and particularly in a majority kind of way, then perhaps they will then take action. So that's my input for today, Teresa.
Thank you so much, Rhonda, and I want to give our guests a chance to respond, but I want to first, as we are in the last minutes here, give another caller a chance to share their thoughts. Loretta in Saskatoon, thanks for calling Blue Sky. What's on your mind today?
Well, just a reminder that often the focus is on those with the least resourced, and they have to do all the explaining and answering when it's actually the middle and low middle income, the majority of people that need to be reminded, push the problem up toward where the powers that be have the policy to change it. So they can be accountable. So the government can be accountable. So those with the wealthiest amount can be accountable rather than projecting that accountability in a dysfunctional way onto those in poverty. This fear about people in poverty not being accountable is really just a projection of the powers that be. So push the problem upward.
Thank you so much, Loretta. Unfortunately, we only have about 45 seconds for each of you for your final thoughts and maybe what you're taking away from our listeners. I'm starting with you, Tracy.
Oh, I just wanted to say I agree totally with that. And also, this is not just about people living in poverty. The Financial Resiliency Institute indicates that 77% of Canadians across the country are feeling stretched right now. So this is like we're seeing the winnowing out of the middle class. So it's not just a poverty issue. So really important for people really to hold their government officials accountable.
Elaine, what are your final thoughts?
Well, I think Blue Sky must be doing an excellent job of educating its listeners, because I complete agreement with both your final, with all of your callers. And I would also like to put in a plug for handwritten postal letters to your politicians, because they don't pay attention to emails anymore. But I just really like to thank you for shining a spotlight on these issues.
Thank you, Elaine. And Peter, you also have 30 seconds. Your final thoughts.
I guess what I would like to say is that we have to keep reminding politicians that they need to follow up on commitments that they've made under international law almost 50 years ago with the UN Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. So that means adequate income security, it means quality and affordable housing and childcare, and it means a living wage. Those are things that we've promised under international law, and it's time to be true to what we've said on paper.
Thank you so much, Peter.
Thank you.
Peter Gilmer is with the Regina Anti-Poverty Ministry. Tracy Smith-Carrier is a professor and Canada Research Chair in advancing the UN Sustainable Development Goals. She's at Royal Roads University. And Elaine Power is a professor of Sociocultural Studies of Sport, Health and the Body at Queen's University.